So hey guys, welcome to the JIRA Service Desk Deep Dive. Now I know most of you guys have kind of seen JIRA Service Desk earlier in the keynote today, but in this presentation, I'm just going to peel a layer back and dive deeper into the product and show you how it can help supercharge your service desk teams. But first up, what really is a service desk? Well, at a fundamental level, you've got a team that provides a service, like an IT team within your organization, and you have customers that make requests to this particular team, like an employee within this organization needing some help. Now, a service desk tool helps you manage the interaction between your team and your customers. And it helps you also organize your process for the process in which your team takes to get work done. Now, JIRA Service Desk actually looks at every single aspect of running a service desk operation. So we've made it simple and intuitive for your customers to create and track their requests using the customer portal. Now, once the request enters your service desk team's lap, we've made it easy to laser focus your teams with prioritized queues of work. We've also introduced service level agreements, so you can set goals for every single ticket that comes in and measure how your team's going. Now, once you've got this process in place, you can actually take a step back and look at your cycle that you've set up. And you can identify trends and bottlenecks in real time using service desk reports. So in this talk, we're going to go through each of these aspects of JIRA Service Desk in detail: the customer portal, queues, SLAs, and reports. But before we get started, just as a show of hands, how many of you guys are already using JIRA as some form of service desk or help desk tool? Wow, there's a lot of you guys out there. So we actually reached out to our existing user base and found a whopping 38% of our customers use JIRA, a product that's designed for software development, as a service desk tool. So JIRA's got custom issue types and flexible workflows, so you can kind of use our robust issue tracker to model your service desk process. But how does that actually end up working? How do customers create a request? Well, let me introduce you to my friend here, Ryan. So he's a smart guy. He's on our finance team, but he's not the most coordinated. So how would Ryan here engage his IT service desk team to get a replacement keyboard? So he logs into JIRA, but he's not really a developer, right? So these agile reports and filters on the dashboard don't really mean much to him. He's got an issue with his keyboard, so he figures he'll raise a ticket in one of these projects. But which one is he going to pick from? So once he's actually picked a project, he's got to select an issue type. Now, is a busted keyboard a fault? Or is he requesting a change to his keyboard? Maybe he should create a purchase issue, because at the end of the day, he knows someone's going to have to purchase a replacement keyboard. Or should he just go and pick IT help? Now, for people like Ryan, who are end users, it can be pretty confusing. Problem doesn't stop there. So he's actually got to fill out a bunch of fields on his issue. So the priority for him is obviously going to be supercritical blocker, right? How many of you guys have customers out there that do that? Yeah, quite a few. But for Ryan, who's he going to set the assignee to? Or what about the components? Is he expected to attach like a photo of his busted keyboard? Well, this story, ladies and gentlemen, is like many others we've heard in customer interviews. Some customers spend a bit of effort configuring JIRA to model their service desk process, only to find that their customers, the people that they want using this system, bypass the system entirely, and they resort to simpler things, like jumping on email, or getting on the phone, or just walking up right next to you and asking, hey man, can I get a new keyboard? Now, one of the things we tried to tackle head-on in Service Desk is this problem. And we think we've solved this problem with the customer portal. So the customer portal provides a simple and intuitive way for your customers to create and track their service desk requests. So we've designed this portal from the ground up. So you can see here that there are large, clear calls to action and quick links to access your previous requests. Now, with JIRA Service Desk, you too can customize and craft this experience for your end users. But before we talk about that, let's look at some of the core concepts. Now, in JIRA, you've got issue types, and they represent the different units of work for your team. Now with Service Desk, you can also define request types. Now, a request type models the way in which your customers request services from your team. They don't want to create an access issue. They want to get access to a system. Now, to them, creating a request for hardware is totally different to creating a request for software, even though your IT service desk team might boil down to a particular purchase issue for them. Now, your service desk team, they deal in issue types. And your customers, they work with request types. Now, the beauty of JIRA Service Desk is that they're both the same entity in your system. So they're both an issue in your system, but your customers have a simplified view of that issue. So out of the box, when you create a new service desk project, you automatically get a bunch of request types, issue types, and workflows created for you, so you can get started on day one. But you've already seen in the keynote how easy it is to use the customer portal. So in this deep dive talk, let's explore what it's like to design the portal. So keyboard replacements are pretty common in our workplace. So let's go and create a request type so that it's easy for our staff to create requests for new keyboards. Now, this is what the customer portal screen looks like, so the admin screen. As you can see, you've got request types, and they're all mapped to a particular issue type. Let's go and create a new one. So we can pick an icon from a selection of icons there, so we'll pick the keyboard icon. We can also give it an issue type, which means that when this request type gets created, it'll create issues of the purchase issue type from our service desk team. We can also give it a customer-facing name and a description. So when customers come to look for a replacement keyboard, they know exactly where to go. Now let's see what it looks like from the customer's perspective. So keyboard replacement is one of the first request types. Now take a close look at this form. What do you notice? There's only one field on this form, and we want to really get you guys to start thinking about the information you want to collect from your customers. You want to make sure that you're collecting the bare minimum essential bits of information that you need to get your work done. But we're going to need a bit more information to process a keyboard request. So let's see how that works. We can quickly edit our form, and we can add fields to it. So these are all the fields that you would have had on the issue type. We don't want to get the priority or components in there, but we do want our customers entering a description. So we simply add the field, and then when you refresh the form, you can see that it's updated immediately. But there's still another problem with this form. What does summary and description even mean? So with JIRA Service Desk, we've empowered you to speak the language of your customers. So you can relabel these fields to something that makes more sense. So instead of summary, you have what do you need? And instead of description, you can ask why do you need it? And indicate that that would help gauge the priority of this particular request. So again, as soon as you save it, your customer portal request form is updated. And that looks a lot better than what we had, especially if you're someone like Ryan. So one neat thing to keep in mind is that request types, they're actually issue type templates. So you can preset some values for some fields. Now we all know that keyboard replacements are hardware peripheral requests. So we can preset the components and labels. Now these won't actually appear to Ryan when he creates his request form. So when he fills out his request form, he still only sees these two fields. And after he creates his request, when he views his issue through the customer portal, he's only got access to the summary, which is kind of the title in this case, and that one field. So why do you need it? But under the covers, when your service desk team gets the issue, you can see that the components and labels have already been pre-filled. And the beauty of this is you now have data-rich issues which you can query on and report for. Now, one thing customers want to know is how their issue is going. So all incoming issues, in this particular case, ends up in our workflow. And our first workflow step is untriaged. So we have someone in our service desk team looking at tickets and then triaging them, so maybe setting the priority accordingly, and then it ends up on the backlog for the team to work on. But what does untriaged mean to the customer? So what we can do is actually remap this status to something more useful. So in this particular screen, you can see that all of the workflow statuses have been listed out. Untriaged, waiting for support, and blocked externally are all the same thing to the customer. The ticket is in IT's court. So basically, we're waiting on IT. Now, one of the things we've introduced in Service Desk is smart notifications. So when the ticket transitions from untriaged to waiting for support, it doesn't actually have a transition from the perspective of the customer. So we don't fire off notifications to unnecessarily bombard them with our internal Service Desk process. Now, with Service Desk, we actually took the opportunity to improve customer notifications in general. So when you create a request, you get a nice, clean email showing only the fields you could have seen in the customer portal. Now, once you get an update to a particular issue, you get an email notification telling you what has changed. And so now the customer is fully aware that the ball is in their court. The issue is waiting on them. And they can reply by logging in to the customer portal, or they can reply directly from their email notification, from whatever email client they're using. So this customer portal provides a simple and intuitive way for your customers to create and track their requests. You're in control. So you can control the fields and statuses that are shown to your customers, and you can maintain a sophisticated internal process, but only expose a really simple one for your customers. And with smart notifications, your users will only be updated when they need to take action. But what happens to this request after it gets created? It ends up on your Service Desk team's lap. Now, using JIRA Service Desk, you can build out queues of work for your team. Queues give your team one place to go, like a prioritized inbox of work for them to get through. Your job as a Service Desk process owner is to define the priority for your team so they can pick up the thing that's on the top of the queue and know that they're picking up the next most important thing. Let's run through some of the core concepts of a queue. So as a Service Desk owner, you define what issues show up. You also control what each queue looks like. So you control the columns that make sense for that particular queue. And everyone in your team has the same consistent view. And most importantly, you control the order. So let's see what it takes to define a queue. So as you can see here, we want to build a queue for all incoming tickets. So when tickets are created, they come in with the status of untriaged. And in this case, we want to order tickets in the time in which they were created. So basically, we want to create a first-in, first-out queue. Now, this is a very lightweight queue. It's kind of useful for tickets that come in and spend a small amount of time for your team to turn around and then get back to the customer. But how should you design your queues? Like, what are the best practices for designing optimal queues? Remember, you're designing queues not for yourself, but for your team. So you want to keep them as focused as possible. So one way to design queues is to get them to match your workflow. So here you can see 4 queues. Incoming tickets come into the needs triage queue. And team members can pick up tickets off this queue and assign them to themselves. Or if you've got a different process, so you might have a team lead that's involved in passing on tickets to the team, you can assign them. And so they'll appear in the My Tickets queue. Now, the whole power of queues is driven through the power of JIRA's query language, JQL. So you might want to define a more complicated type of queue, like a due soon queue. Now, say a customer requests a system upgrade a month before they actually need it. You can use the power of JQL to bring issues that are due soon and to emit all the other issues away from your team's radar, because they don't really need to work on that website upgrade or phone system upgrade until months down the track. Another way of breaking up queues, or breaking up your work into queues, is to split based on areas of specialization. So for example, you might have a sub-team that handles all of the purchase order requests. So Ryan's keyboard request that came in might go to a particular procurement team. So you can filter out a queue just based on that. If you've got a really large team, you can even delve further. So you might have a team that focuses on procurement for hardware requests. But what you find in reality is you end up with a hybrid of queues. Queues that highlight parts of your workflow, like a triage step or a due soon queue. Or you might have queues for specific sub-teams, like desktop support, sysadmin, and ops. or even a special one where you liaise with your finance team, so you might have a shared queue for procurement. Now, one of the key parts of defining a queue is to make sure the order is just right. Now, some strategies of ordering include ordering by the created date for the first in, first out effect, ordering by the due date, or you can also order by a specific priority on a ticket. So how many of you guys use the priority or severity field on a ticket to triage or order your tickets? Well, there's quite a lot of you out there. We've seen this as a common case, but what I want to talk about in more detail is actually a more powerful way of doing prioritization. And that's something totally new that we've introduced in Service Desk. It's using service-level agreements. So a service-level agreement is like a goal for your team and an expectation you set for your customers. So in JIRA Service Desk, we've put SLAs, or service-level agreements, at the forefront of your team. So every issue that gets created will be assigned an SLA based on the rules that you define. Now, anyone that's used SLAs before will understand that they're very sophisticated beasts. So we're proud to announce that we've acquired Vertigo SLA from Valiantis, a leading marketplace add-on. Now, with the expertise of Vertigo SLA, we've actually built a brand new, flexible, and robust SLA engine that lets you define all of your complicated SLA rules. Now, before we jump into some examples, let's look at some of the core concepts behind SLAs. So an SLA rule has two parts. So the first part is the time metric. Now, you can think of it like a stopwatch. You define when to start and stop measuring time. And each time metric has a goal associated with it. Now, the goal is the maximum allowed time for that time metric. So if you exceed that goal, you've breached your SLA. Now, let me run through a quick example to make this more clear. So you might have an SLA rule that states that all critical and blocker issues need to be resolved within 24 hours. And all other issues need to be resolved within 3 days. So what's the time metric here? What time unit are we actually measuring? It's the time to resolution. And the goal? For critical and blocker issues, it's 24 hours. And for everything else, it's 3 days. Now let's look at what the time to resolution actually means. And when you consider the workflow of this particular issue, it starts out as something that gets created. Our support team takes a particular look at it. They determine that, yep, I can resolve that particular ticket. And then they work on it, and then it's done. So for the time to resolution, you start counting time when the issue gets created, and you stop counting time when a resolution has been set on that particular issue. Now let's see how easy it is to define this particular SLA rule in JIRA Service Desk. So first up, we give the time metric a name. We're measuring the time to resolution. And then we pick some start events. So when do we trigger starting our stopwatch? And when do we stop counting? So we start when the issue is created. We stop when the resolution is set. And then we can set some goals. So in any case where the priority is greater than critical, so it's critical or blocker, we want to set the goal, or our target time, to 24 hours. And for all other issues, 72 hours. So ladies and gentlemen, we've defined an SLA in under 30 seconds. And as soon as you've defined this SLA, you get an immediate report of the percentages of issues that would have breached or passed that particular SLA. Now, I started this conversation by talking about SLAs and prioritization. So how do the two integrate? Let's drive our procurement queue based on this newly created SLA. And one of the things we can do is add the SLA as a column in our queue. So you can quickly see the amount of time remaining we have before we need to resolve particular tickets. And we can also order the queue based on the time to resolution. So things that have breached SLA or about to breach SLA are at the top. So here you can see that Ryan's ticket has come in towards the end. Now, if we delve into Ryan's ticket and we change the priority from major to critical, you can see that 66 hours left moves to 18 hours left. So we've actually moved in our SLA rule bracket. And you can see that his ticket has actually moved up in the queue, but it still hasn't trumped other tickets that are above it, that are about to breach SLA or that have just breached SLA, even though those tickets are minor tickets. And here's one is a critical one. So SLAs give you a really sophisticated and ultimately fair way of doing prioritization. It's pretty awesome, but reality can be a bit more complicated, and I can see a few heads nodding. So our simple diagram is not so simple, because at times we're actually going to be waiting for the customer to get back to us on a ticket. Now, the time to resolution actually starts counting time when the ticket gets created, right through to when the ticket gets resolved. But sometimes the customer might not reply to email notifications straight away. They might be on leave, or they might just have overlooked a particular notification. And so it doesn't really make sense to include the time that we're waiting on them into our SLA, because it could really be forever. So one of the things you want to do is to pause your SLA when it's waiting for the customer, or waiting for some external party. So you're waiting for a vendor to get back to you, or you're blocked by something else. So what we've done is we've made it super easy to define these SLA pause states. So in JIRA Service Desk, you can easily configure where and when you'd like to pause your particular time metric. So as soon as it's paused, as soon as it enters waiting for customer, the SLA clock is paused, and as soon as it leaves, it starts to continue counting time. Now, in some cases, the time to resolution is actually a tough thing to bind yourself to. Some issues take a lot of back and forth, waiting for customer, waiting for support, until you actually diagnose the problem, let alone solve it. So what some teams will want to do for some particular issue types is to put an SLA around the time to respond rather than the time to resolve the overall ticket. Let me show you what I mean. So our workflow could look something like this. So in this particular case, we've actually asked the customer 4 different questions, and they've gotten back to us. And then eventually, we've gotten to the crux of the problem, and we've solved it, and the ticket is resolved. What we want to do is put a cap on the amount of time that the ticket is waiting in our lap. So we want to put an SLA around this particular time interval, and this time interval, and this one, and this one. And so this particular example has 4 loops going back and forth. There might only be 1 loop, or there might be 10. Right? You can never tell until you actually work on the ticket. But what we're trying to do is define an SLA to say that anytime the ticket is waiting on us, we don't want to spend more than 4 hours before we get back to the customer. So what we're really defining is one single SLA. Now, using JIRA Service Desk, you can really easily do this, and I'm going to show you how. So we start counting time when the issue is created, and we also start counting time when the issue enters our court, so when it's waiting for support. And we stop counting time when the issue is waiting on the customer, so we've asked the customer a question and we're waiting on them, so we've got back to them, or we finally resolved the ticket. So this particular SLA definition is kind of cyclic in nature. And let me show you how this works in action. So first off, your customer raises an issue. It ends up with your team. As soon as they get that particular ticket, they spend some time on it. And if they spend more time than they're actually allowed, so they spend more than 4 hours, this particular timer actually turns red. So in this case, it's still counting time, but we're 2.5 hours over our SLA. So once your team actually does get around to responding, you get a little red X to indicate you have responded, so we're not counting time anymore, but you've breached that SLA. When the customer gets back to your query and returns the ticket over to you, so it's waiting on support again, you actually get a new SLA. So you have 4 hours in which to respond to that customer, so respond to that particular query. This time around, we've responded almost immediately. So we've passed that particular cycle in our SLA. Now, as you can imagine, when the customer responds again, we're going to start another SLA cycle. So we have another 4 hours in which to get back to the customer. Now, these particular cyclic SLAs, although they're easy to define, they're also easy to report on. Now, if you look at any particular issue, you can go back in time and see how responsive you've been on the customer. So all of those SLA cycles, the ones you've breached and the ones you've succeeded, are all there on the issue. Now, we've only really gone through a few examples, but there's loads more that you can configure, like time to triage, time to assign, time waiting on vendors. So every team and every process is different. But the powerful SLA engine in Service Desk gives you the flexibility to measure what matters to your particular team. So with SLAs, you can actually quickly see how you're doing at the issue level and also at the aggregate level. So you get a quick summary of the percentages of issues that have met your particular SLA. But what about in between? Sometimes you want to query for SLAs. Now with the power of JIRA's query language combined with SLAs, you can actually craft pretty awesome queries. Now let me show you some examples. So a team lead might want to set up a queue, which is again powered by JQL, so that urgent issues aren't dropped. So what they really care about are asking the question or answering the question, what issues are about to breach SLA? Now you can really easily do this using JQL. So you want to find out all issues where the time to resolution is less than or equal to an hour. So they're going to breach SLA in an hour if I don't get someone on my team to look at that particular ticket. Now another particular SLA query that you might want to craft is a report. So how many tickets have I worked on in the last week have breached SLA? How many tickets have breached SLA? Now these sorts of queries are actually pretty easy to define. Now you can do this again with the power and flexibility of JQL and SLAs. These are reports, but they're reports as a list of issues. Now they don't really give you the ability to visualize the performance of your team through time. So we've built out reporting as a first-class citizen in JIRA Service Desk. Now you can use Service Desk reports to measure and improve your team's process. Let's look at some core concepts, and then I'll run you through some interesting examples. So a report basically has one or more series. Now you can think of a series as like a line on that particular graph. A series plots a metric over time. So a metric can be things like the number of issues that got created, the number of issues that got resolved, or even things like time metrics, like the time you took to respond, or the average time you took to resolve tickets. So you can plot these through time and see if your performance is improving. Let's quickly create a basic report. So what we're going to do is create the standard one that you've always seen, the created versus resolved report in JIRA. So you can pick from a series. So we're doing tickets created, and we're adding another series for tickets resolved. So you can give it a name, a label for your series, pick a color, and also use JQL filtering. And I'll dive down into that in a sec. So in under 30 seconds, you've actually created a report. Now, as soon as you save this report, it's visible on your service desk. So any team member on your team can take a look at this report and see how they're going. So you're fully in control as the process owner to define the reports that matter to you. So if the tickets in this case, if the red line is always higher than the green line, you know that your service desk team slammed. So how about a more complicated report? This time, let's split the incoming tickets that we have based on the priority. So we get an idea of the distribution of tickets that are coming in. So what we can do is define one series and pick out all tickets that were created with the blocker priority. We can create another series to pick out the tickets that were created with critical, and a third series to pick out everything else. Now, at a glance, we get a very good overview of the load that's coming in. So we can delve into any spikes or any trends and see what's going on. Now, this data here is actually real data. This is data from our own IT service desk team. So you can see the kind of dips on the weekend and then the spikes midweek. Now, one of the cool things about these reports is you can quickly go back in time. Now, our own IT service desk team has been using JIRA to run their service desk operations for the past 11 years. Now, with JIRA Service Desk, we were able to retroactively report on issues in the past. So as soon as you install JIRA Service Desk, if you're already using JIRA to monitor your tickets, incoming tickets that are coming in, the ones that are getting resolved, you can actually report on this through time. Now, this is a report, the same report, looking back at the past year by week. Now, as you can see here, in December, we've got a bit of a dip. But one of the things that piqued my interest was, why was there a sudden spike at the last week of February? Right? The number of minor tickets kind of shot through the roof. Now what I did was, I split up that report so I could carve it out based on the nature of issues that were created. And what I found was the number of network problems that were created around that same time kind of lined up to that spike. Now this actually lines up with a wireless authentication framework our organization had introduced that week. Now, it's pretty amazing when data can speak to you like that. Now another cool type of report you can build out and visualize is the workload and performance of your team through time. So in this particular case, we've got 4 series, 1 for each assignee. And you can use reports like this to figure out when you need to hire more staff on your service desk team. Now these reports are cool, but how do you report on time? We've talked about time throughout the SLA piece. Now when you add a series, you can actually plot the time metrics that you've defined in SLAs. Now they'll appear in your series dropdown. So things like time to response or time to resolution will appear here, so you can plot them on charts. So here you can see a graph for another team that has been using JIRA Service Desk. Now this shows that on average, in the last year, they took about 12 days to respond to tickets and about a month to resolve them. So I thought that was kind of crazy, like 12 days to respond to a particular ticket. I mean, come on. Now I split out this particular graph based on the nature of the tickets that were coming in. And as you can see here, blocker tickets are actually resolved much sooner, or actually responded to much sooner than anything else. So this team is still working based on that priority. Now if you wanted to, you can use charts like this to figure out what you should set your SLA target to be. So in this particular case, if we set our SLA target to between 4 and 6 hours, any blocker tickets that kind of exceeded 6 hours would legitimately break our SLA. That's pretty awesome. And of course, you can report on SLA values themselves. So here you can see another team that's recently started using JIRA Service Desk. So in orange over here, you can see the number of tickets that are getting resolved. And you can see in green the number of tickets that are getting resolved within SLA. So they only started introducing SLAs in the last 2 weeks. Now this particular team has already shown an improvement. Now it's awesome to have charts like this because you can visualize your performance. And this sort of improvement through time, you can use these metrics and these goals to excite and motivate your team. Now they have goalposts that they're actually working to. Before they didn't have this visibility. So let's take a step back. Now we've talked about how simple and intuitive it is to create and track requests for a customer. You can define queues of work for your team to make sure that they're laser focused and they have the correct priority. You can also define SLAs, so you've got goalposts on every single ticket that comes in, and you can track and measure how you're going. And you can also take a bird's eye view of your process to identify bottlenecks and trends in real time before things blow up. But what happens if customers could solve their own problems without needing to create a request? And this is something that we've been thinking about for quite a while. And we've built out an awesome solution with our deep integration with knowledge base in JIRA Service Desk. So what you really want to be doing is turning your service desk into a self-service desk by presenting solutions to common problems. Because you don't want your service desk team getting slammed, giving the same responses day in, day out. That's something that they can automate. Now, Service Desk Knowledge Base is a space in Confluence. And a knowledge article is any page within that space. So some of you guys might already be using Confluence as a knowledge store. So you can hook it up straight away. But for those of you guys that haven't started using Confluence to capture these knowledge articles, we've actually streamlined the process to get started with Confluence blueprints. So you can quickly create a knowledge base space, which gives you a landing page to house your KB content. And we've also built out common page blueprints, so how-to articles and troubleshooting guides, so you can get started really quick. Now, the true power of knowledge bases comes to light when it's hooked up to JIRA Service Desk. All you have to do is pick the space in Confluence you want to link to, and that's where the magic starts. So the first thing you'll notice is that there's a search bar in the customer portal. So customers can type and start searching for solutions before they even need to raise a request. So they see the article in context. So they don't need to leave the customer portal, and they can indicate that that particular article was useful. Now, I've got to be honest with you guys. How many of you guys search for solutions before actually creating a request? So some of you guys are a bit goody two-shoes. That's kind of nice to see. Yeah. They could be liars. Now, one of the things that I do is I jump straight in. I jump straight in and try and get my IT service desk team engaged on whatever request I needed. So if it was a broken keyboard, I'm going to go and create that particular request because I know that they'll respond to my request. Now, we've realized this. So one of the things that we've done is instead of just searching for articles, we actually present suggestions as someone is filling out a request form. So this is likely to prompt them. So if they've got a solution on the side that they think can help solve their problems, they can immediately take a look at it at a glance or dismiss it. So they can continue on with that request, or they can get their problem resolved by that particular knowledge article. Now, the usefulness of a knowledge system depends on the existence of quality articles. So how do you create these KB articles in the first place? Now, one strategy could be to get your service desk team, take them away for a month, and get them to start writing KB articles till the cows come home. But obviously, that's not practical. So when your team comes across a common request, they can easily create a KB article from within that issue. So if they notice that they've seen the request for wireless access for guests coming in, they can create a KB article. They can start filling out some details and give it some labels, and then pick from a template. Now, as soon as they've picked a template, they can start editing the content straight in Confluence. So it's one really simple flow. So we've made it really easy for your service desk team to start capturing knowledge. Now, we've taken this optimized request process and turned it on its head. We've made it more efficient by letting customers help themselves. Now, this means that they actually get solutions faster. We're not just palming off their requests to a knowledge engine. They're actually solving their requests faster, so they're happier. And your team has more time to work on the pressing issues, the issues that actually require their attention. So, how do you get started? At the beginning of this presentation, I asked how many of you guys already use JIRA as a service desk tool. And there was an overwhelming majority here. So I know some of you guys are sitting back and thinking, what's it going to take? I've spent a lot of time crafting my JIRA instance. I've got my workflows right. I've got my issue types right. But now there's this new service desk thing. Damn, now I have to migrate all my stuff into JIRA Service Desk. Well, we've actually thought about this problem. And you'll be glad to hear that it'll only take you 3 clicks to get started. So as soon as you install Service Desk, you've got a top-level menu, and you can create a Service Desk project. So you get presented with this dialog. You can choose to create a new Service Desk project. So that gives you all our bundled issue types and workflows. There's a bit of best practices in there. So you can start with what we think would be ideal. But if you've already crafted your own Service Desk, you can actually enable it for an existing project. All you have to do is select your project, and within a matter of seconds, you'll land into the Service Desk UI. So right from this UI, you have quick access to every single thing that I've talked to in this presentation. Queues, reports, SLAs, the customer portal, and knowledge base will be at your fingertips. So JIRA Service Desk is available for download right now from the marketplace. So get started and supercharge your IT teams.